All right, so next I want to talk about the GPT family of models, which is what this course is mostly about. OpenAI has other models, things like DALL-E and Whisper, both of which we cover in this course. DALL-E generates images, Whisper takes audio files and translates/transcribes them as text. We cover those later on, but most of this course is about GPT, specifically GPT-4. So we do use some GPT-3 in this course. I should stop just to say that GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. We will talk about the transformer part in the next video. It will be completely optional. I'll do a very high-level dive into transformers and the architecture behind the GPT family of models. It has no bearing on the technical stuff in this course. It's just there as information if you care. So completely optional following this video. Anyway, we have GPT-3. We have GPT 3.5, which is not a whole new model. It's just a finely tuned version of GPT-3. And as of a couple weeks ago, we now have GPT-4, which is a whole new, completely different model in the GPT family. So again, it stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. There's also just GPT and GPT-2, but we have pretty much no reason to use those today. And just a heads up, this course makes use of all three of these, 3, 3.5, and 4. I know the terminology gets confusing. I use GPT-4 as much as possible, but there are certain API endpoints that don't support it currently. Also, it is way, way more expensive. It's like 20 times more expensive to use GPT-4 compared to 3.5. And we can often get exactly the same result using 3.5, not to mention it can be faster. So just because GPT-4 is the new fancy thing, that doesn't mean it's always the best choice. And that's a conversation we'll have later. So all of these GPT-X models are large language models. Basically, they take text as an input, and they generate text as an output. We give it some sort of initial prompt, and the models will continue that prompt. So in its simplest form, a prompt could be something like, why did the chicken cross the? And then we ask the model, just by giving it this piece of text, it will try to complete with the next most probable choice, the next best word that it thinks fits that prompt. So why did the chicken cross the, and then road could be the next answer, the next word we get as the output. We can do things like, my favorite food is colon, and then it will fill it in with what it thinks is the most probable next word. We can do way more complicated things, right? Translate this from French or from English to French. We give it snails, and it responds with escargot. These are all just simple examples. Write a tagline for a doggy daycare. That could be the text input, and it might, this is actually real. All of these examples here are real. It responded to me with cozy, safe, and fun for your furry friend. We can also do things like write 2 sentences explaining acid rain to a toddler. Acid rain is rain that has acids in it, which makes it a little bit yucky. The last thing I'll talk about is some of the training data that GPT-3 was trained on. Now, I wish I could tell you about the data GPT-4 was trained on, but OpenAI has not released that yet. So all we have is the data GPT-3 was trained on, which was a huge, huge amount of text data, over 45 terabytes of text, and it includes a subset of what's called the Common Crawl dataset. Common Crawl is an organization that crawls across the web and archives and creates a massive dataset of basically as many pages on the web as it possibly can that you can use to train models or perform analysis on. Also, databases of online books, all of the English language Wikipedia, lots of data, and this is just for GPT-3, so it's speculated that the data set for 4 is significantly larger, but there's no evidence of that, or there's no official confirmation from OpenAI. Same thing here when we talk about the technical details of GPT-3. We don't have those details for GPT-4 just yet, but GPT-3 is a huge step up in size compared to GPT-2. Again, we can assume the same is true for GPT-4. It costs almost $5 million just in GPU cost simply to train GPT-3. And the model itself is over 800 gigabytes of essentially just numeric data in a file or multiple files. Just to store the model, it's 800 gigabytes, so it's huge. So there's a lot that we can do with GPT, but at the end of the day, we provide text and we get text as output. Typically, we provide some detailed instructions, some sort of prompt, And there's a lot that goes into engineering a prompt, which we have a whole section dedicated to coming up pretty soon in the course. So the next thing you need to know is that there are two main ways that we can interact with these GPT models using OpenAI APIs. There is the completion API, which expects a single text prompt, basically like what you see right here, and it responds to us with output. And this has been the standard way to interact with any of the GPT models since OpenAI first created any commercial APIs. This was the only option we had up until basically last month. So the completion endpoints do not support GPT-4. They do support GPT-3 and some of the 3.5 models. We'll talk about that. Then there is a whole separate way of interacting with these models, which is the chat API. The chat API has a slightly different format. This is what we spend a lot of time on in the course because it's currently the only API endpoint that supports GPT-4 at all. And the way we interact with it is using a list of messages in a chat-based format. So it's slightly different, but behind the scenes, it's still just a GPT model that we're talking to, that we're interacting with. It's just two different ways that we go about it. So in this course, we'll start with the completion endpoint. It's simpler. And then we'll move on to the chat endpoints, which is what we spend most of the course on. So just keep that in mind. Two different ways to talk to these generative pre-trained transformer models. There's distinctions, both in terms of how we go about interacting with them, but also which models specifically they support. And right now, GPT-4 is only supported with this chat syntax, which we'll cover soon.